It has actually been quite a long time since the last theory I made, and the simple reason for that is that I've been lazy. That and enjoying the lovely spring here in Finland. This probably is the worst spring we've ever had. It went from this to this in just 1.5 months. But at least I can finally enjoy some pretty apple blossoms. But enough about the weather, and let's get to the point. Today our topic is the story of the 8 honest people. The what now? It's alright. Most of the Touhou fans have probably never even heard about it. This theory will continue on the same tracks as the most recent one, so back to the CD stories. This time we're focusing only onto one CD though. The first CD published by Zun, Dolls in Pseudo Paradise. This CD has a story about 8 men who get spirited into Gensokyo and also die in there. A quite straightforward story, but like always, it is completely shrouded in mystery and cryptic hints. So without any further ado, let's get into what we are here to do. Okay, first of all, this theory falls into the same category as the most recent theory, my Reimu and Marissa theory, and the most famous theory so far, the Rumia theory. So basically, we're talking about the timelines here. But in order to do that, we must first clarify that we're on the same page. Okay, let me read the simplified story for you who are not familiar with it. 8 men, who are said to be thieves, get spirited into Gensokyo. Immediately after this, they start to die one by one. Most of the deaths are caused by this mysterious Pierrot that literally kills them. The story is divided so that each chapter, should we say, is being told in the point of view of each man who die in that said chapter. Ultimately, the last man commits suicide by hanging himself in a western building in the middle of the forest we get to see in the last chapter of that story. After that, a red and white Miko, presumably the Hakurei Shrine Maiden, sees how a blonde girl runs from the forest, bows to her, and exits the Gensokyo before the Shrine Maiden's eyes. Also, before this story there's another story, but this one is much more vague and patchy than the one about the 8 men. The first few lines of this story seem to be told in a really vague way, but after a few lines it starts to get a bit more fixed to the point of view of this unknown person who tells the story. As vague as it seems, I think I've come up with a quite solid theory about when and about who this story is about. First of all, take a look at the date when this was published. 30th of December 2002, between EOSD and PCB. And what character was reintroduced in PCB? Alice Margatroyd, our dear 7-colored puppeteer. And before you ask any questions, I have to make it clear that I think that the 2 stories in this CD are completely separate. They take place in completely different time periods. But let's not proceed too fast. Also, at this point I'd suggest you to go and read the stories for yourself. It makes the understanding of this theory much easier. But anyhow, what makes me think that these stories are about Alice is quite a simple one. In the story of 8 honest men, they start to get killed one by this mysterious Pierrot, who is presumably a woman, because one of the men described the Pierrot as a beautiful one. Also, when one of the men tries to hang themselves in fear, he gets resurrected, but it turns out that he is the one who kills the few remaining men after most of them had died already. Which brings us to Alice. How does this sound familiar? How about Alice's Hourai doll? How it hangs itself after she's defeated? And the resurrection of that man, and how he became the one who killed his friends instead of the Pierrot. Doesn't it sound like he was being manipulated? who else would be a better candidate for that than Alice with her power to manipulate inanimate objects and possibly to keep the man alive. Although the man said that he was aware that after he hanged himself for the first time, he wasn't a human anymore. But his friends thought that he was. What else would look like a human but not be one at the same time than a doll? Also, one of the men was killed after he was nailed to a tree by this Pierrot. Just take a look at this picture and keep in mind that this picture is canon. It is starting to look awfully clear that the killer Pierrot is Alice. Also, the house to which the men take residence in is very likely the one of Alice's, because it is in the middle of a forest. Presumably the forest of magic. And I don't see why Marisa would put up a dinner ready for the 8 men each day and poison them. And then there's the fact that the Pierrot is never mentioned after when the story is about halfway through. There's just this blonde girl whom the Shrine Maiden sees at the end of the story. It would be weird if there just happened to be a random girl who had no connection to the men at all. Only thing I actually find weird is that the killer is, well, a Pierrot. Only way Alice could visually resemble a Pierrot is the fact that she has somewhat similar colors as do the traditional Pierrots. But once I start talking about the time period in which this event takes place, we can forget Alice's appearance, because we don't know what she looked like. You'll know why later on, but back to the Shrine Maiden. The Shrine Maiden, whose identity is obscure, also says that she thinks that the girl was with the 8 men, although she wasn't. The Shrine Maiden might have thought that she was with them because she was near them many times, because she is the Pierrot. She is Alice Murgatroyd, the 7-colored puppeteer, the Witch of Death. But then we get to the interesting part, because we don't know when all of this takes place. But I have once again a hunch. It is clear that this has to take place before Reimu or her mother knew Alice. This is if we still believe that PC-98 Reimu is our Windows Reimu's mother. This has to be so because the Shrine Maiden in that story doesn't recognize Alice. Simple as that. But it is also worth to notify that one of the men clearly fell in love with the Shrine Maiden when he saw her for the first time. If you're familiar with PC-98 Reimu and Windows Reimu at all, you would know that Reimu is just a child during the events of PC-98 games and the first few of the Windows games. I don't think that Zun would use that kind of a controversial themes in his games. No, I think that the Shrine Maiden in question in this story is the one before the PC-98 Shrine Maiden, who I believe to be Reimu's mother. I believe that all this takes place just before Reimu's mother becomes the Shrine Maiden. That's because the blonde, presumably Alice, just simply exits Gensokyo at the end of the story. It is not said where she went, but isn't it quite obvious? Makai is the place where we meet Alice for the first time. It is very likely that this is the event where she moves to Makai. Maybe she needed the power of these 8 souls to break through the Hakurei barrier to enter the Makai. In the end, in Shintoism the number 8 is like the number 7 in Christianity, a holy number. This also may or may not be really close to the event where Alice becomes a Yukai. That's because during the Mystic Square, Alice had just recently become a Yukai. That's why the events of that story have to take place near when Reimu's mother became Shrine Maiden. The time gap just cannot be too long. But then we have the second story, the more vague one. I believe that this one is told completely by Alice. Also remember that Kaguya and Eirin weren't part of the Touhou canon during this time, even if Princess Kaguya is mentioned. Anyway, In this story, Alice has returned to Gensokyo, and I believe that this happens just before the events of PCB, or at least at the start of the Windows era. This is supported by the fact that Alice speaks about one certain girl who lives in a Western-styled house in the forest and usually doesn't get involved with the human village. She also says that the girl reminds her of another girl she had seen before, and comments that the girl has to be the other girl's child because the girl looks so much like the other girls she knew when the other girl was a kid. Doesn't this sound like Marisa, and the problem that she had been child twice in Touhou canon? The time difference is just so great that it is natural for her to think that she couldn't be anything else than the daughter of Marisa she knew. And Alice, I hate to tell you this, but according to our Marisa theory, it isn't Marisa's child, but Marisa herself. She just has a different but highly similar body like back in PC98 era, where she and Alice met for the first time. Alice also speaks a lot about some certain doll in this vague story. Not much is said about it other than that the doll speaks to her. She wants to get rid of it as soon as possible, and that the eyes of that doll are real eyes and that she changes them regularly. For real eyes to fit into a doll, it has to be the size of a real human. And wait, didn't Alice presumably make a doll out of one of those 8 honest men? The pieces are starting to click together. In that story, she also mentions a criminal who goes by the name Owen, which is a clear Easter egg for one of Agatha Christie's novels, but I also believe that Alice means herself when she talks about this supposed criminal. In the end, she was the one who murdered these 8 men, and she even comments about the Owen in a way that makes it clear that whoever the criminal may be, the criminal is a murderer. Quote, "A criminal with as much imagination as you and Owen could easily have a rope around your neck." And lastly, she comments how people yell "it's magic" or "it's a yukai." I really strongly believe that she is talking about her most recent encounters with the people of the human village. She seems disappointed by them, and she also states earlier that yukai are generally more peaceful than humans. It really strongly seems that she really doesn't like the way people treat yukai now that she herself has become one and has returned to Gensokyo once again just before the endless winter incident. And that pretty much concludes everything I have for you about the story of 8 honest men. I believe that most of you saw Alice as this pretty innocent magician who wouldn't harm anybody, especially humans. But like I did with Marisa's case, I did the same with Alice. A complete turnaround. This also supports our Marisa theory a bit because this means that Alice was aware of Marisa's existence beforehand and that she remembers her even though she believes that this Marisa is not the same as the recent Marisa. But this is where the Zun's quote about PC98 and Windows Marisa being the same person comes into play. But anyhow, this was my theory about Alice's past and how it is connected to the story of the dolls in Pseudo Paradise. And I dare to say that if you remember how I said in the end of my first Oni theory, how my ultimate goal with these theories is to create a perfect timeline for Touhou canon, we are getting really damn close to that. I need to get only few more theories made and then I would be all set. But it might still take a while to get to that point. But never mind that. Because now, like always, it's your turn to tell me what do you think about today's theory. Did you like it or did you dislike it? Also, once again, please keep in mind that the conclusions we reached in this theory and in every other theory too are not canon and they're just theories. But who knows, maybe they'll actually turn out to be true. Also, if you have any theory ideas yourself, please leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to hear them. But for now, I have to bid you a farewell. My name's Owen, and we'll see in the next video.